J&J.
No, I wasn't.
That was
And that, and I don't think that's because, as so many people say, during the Reagan years, there seemed to be a relaxation in the regulations and activity. I don't think it was because of that. It's just that I knew what had to be done at J&J, and I had to spend my time there. I mean, I obviously kept my eyes and ears on the federal government regulatory agenda.
What did OSHA look like to you from the outside, to the extent you were dealing with it? Did it look different from when you were in it before?
No, it's funny. The further you get outside the Beltway, the less Washington impresses you and the less impact it has on you. It's just amazing. I mean, we think the world is revolving around us and is watching us. And I mean, it's hard to read anything but Beltway News and the Washington Post. I mean,
that's a Beltway company paper.
Yeah, it is. When I lived down here the last time, I used to get the Baltimore Sun on Sunday to find out what the hell's going on in the rest of the world. But, I never believed that there was a big, that OSHA was retrenching during the Reagan years. As a matter of fact, the egregious policy came out during the Reagan era and VPP and some others. But a lot of my peers thought that. And as I moved up in the National Safety Council, as to the vice chairman of the board of directors and all, I had an awful lot of contact with my peers, the safety professionals and the safety directors of corporate America. And they felt that there was some retrenchment. And it may have come from safety directors of companies that didn't have decent programs and had more contentious labor relations, and therefore more employees calling OSHA and complaining and visiting and so forth. Of course, I was always very critical of my peers because they wanted the government to do it. Hey, Jerry, OSHA should be doing more and writing more standards and making us do. I said, what do you mean? You're the one. You have an ethical responsibility to tell your plant managers and your company presidents you ought to be doing this because it's the right thing to do, not because the government has a regulation. And there are a lot of safety people who want the government to do it, just don't have just aren't doing what they should be doing. So there may, but I was just kind of involved in the voluntarism of the National Safety Council, ASSC, and J&J. And maybe, in fact, that's why I wasn't too concerned or get too involved in federal OSHA, because maybe they weren't doing as much as they were doing before. I don't know. I just don't really believe that. But
I imagine you didn't dream at that time that you'd be coming back to the agency.
You couldn't have got me back to this agency with dynamite. I remember a person coming up to me. It was October, National Safety Council, October 88? Was that the election year, 88? Yeah. It said if, I was a Republican, he says if, he didn't say if, he was convinced that George Bush was going to win. Would you consider going back as the Assistant Secretary? I said, are you kidding? The actual words were, I said, oh, brother.
This wasn't someone connected with the Bush
No. A member of the board of directors of the National Safety Council, yeah, I said no. He said, well, don't say no, just later on, and then
He might have been signing you out for somebody else.
he was, as a matter of fact. Yeah. Anyone asks me, I say, I died and went to heaven when I went to Johnson & Johnson. Terrific company. I mean, terrific company.
But they lured you back to Washington. How did that happen?
A little lunacy in my family. Why would I ever come back here? Well.
And how did it happen?
Well, there are a number of people who called and approached me, and then approached me in a group. And I say, why would I want to do that? Notwithstanding notwithstanding the money, because I knew it was about a 40% cut in salary. As it turns out, I lost over $240,000 worth of stock options. And I just say, I mean, I knew that. I walked into this with my eyes wide open. I guess the more I thought of it, I said, it's too big a sacrifice for my wife. But then I said, it's got to, it's been my profession ever since I defused a Sidewinder guided missile in the Navy and lived to talk about it. I've been in the health and safety arena, and this has got to be the #1 health and safety job in the world. I mean, truly in the world. I've traveled all over the world, and OSHA is looked upon as probably the leader. Now, the Brits probably don't say that. They probably think they have the better program and all, but OSHA is really recognized as being one of the, in a leadership position around the world in occupational safety health. So if I've been committed to this field, this profession, why not try the top job? And I really believed I could make a difference. Whether I do or not, I don't know. But I really believed that,
Make a difference, that triggers something in my mind. Did Mrs. Dole call you personally early on, or
one of her
Bob Davis?
Actually, it was Bob Davis. Yeah. I think he did probably the bulk of the initial
He was
recruiting.
With the personnel.
Yep.
Transition.
And then I interviewed with met Mrs. Dole.
How did that go? What kinds of questions did she ask, and what kind of agenda did she seem to have?
Well, it sounded like it was, as interviews go, it was probably, I mean, if interviewers ask some tough questions, or your future company or boss or personnel manager can ask some tough questions, it's comparing her interview with those kinds of interviews. It was a piece of cake. It was, I mean, we were locked in mind together. We were thinking alike. I mean, we talked a whole range of issues. I even talked about data. I said, this country is 40 to 60% underreported in fatalities. I said, how can we be well, someone died, we can't count that, I said and data is what really drove the J&J program. And being active in the National Safety Council and knowing that 39% of all occupational deaths occur in motor vehicles, not in steel mills and chemical plants. I said, we ought to have a seatbelt stand. Well, she started talking about 208, which was the airbag, really, decision when she was Secretary of Transportation. It was just no question. The chemistry was perfect. And Bob Davis, I found out later, Bob Davis came in. She says, "Come on and sit down, Bob." Well, that was the message that I flunked, Bob thought, because this had happened before. And I don't know, we're talking, and she gets up and she says, "I want you to be my assistant secretary for OSHA." Davis thought I had blew it. Yeah, it was a good interview. She was she's a very warm, sincere woman. Just committed to wanting to do the best job possible in the Department of Labor.
Did she pretty much delegate to you the major decisions, or did you consult with her on some major things?
Always consulted with her, even though I'd say, "Wow, this is exactly what we talked about early on," and so forth, but never being presumptuous enough to think that I knew her thinking at a particular time. Always bounced them off of her, or maybe it didn't go that far. We'd sit down with Rod and Bob.
Rod Yam
And Bob and say, "Hey, boy, that's good." I said, "Wait, do we have a briefing for her? Hey, consider it done. We'll mention it to her. We'll get back to you. Let's not take up a lot of time, because that's what she probably wants you to do." So it was.
Sometimes you did go to her directly.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Yep. And one was really we revisited the safety belt thing, and I mean, she wanted that. That was kind of a natural coming from her Department of Transportation in her 208 decision, which was a major decision. Yeah.
One more thing I wanted to be sure to ask. Did you have any reaction or comments to the PRB process in relation to OSHA? This is a new wrinkle that, of course, that was added since you were assistant.
Yes, yeah.
Before. How has it made a contribution to the regulatory process, or what? Just
yeah.
Reaction on.
Oh yeah, I do think the PRB is
Are there ways
contributes.
to improve too?
Well, I don't know. I think PRB doesn't need to be fixed. I don't think there may be another way, but it makes it more difficult. The process is more difficult with it. However,
it's another layer.
Yeah, but the product that comes out is generally better. Even though I may disagree with the product, I liked it the way it was going in. That's the process, and that's and I mean that's the way it should be. I think you need to have some independent eyes looking at it from different perspectives, and so I believe in the process. Yeah, as I believe in the OMB process. People think I'm kidding. It's tough, agonizing, but generally, huh?
Thorne Auchter used to complain to me about it. Thorne Auchter was very frustrated with the OMB process when he was here. When I interviewed him several times, and it can be difficult.
I'm not frustrated. It's difficult, but it serves the public. Yeah, that's what it does. It serves the public or the regulated community. I think now. You'll get organized labor that thinks it's a terrible thing, but I don't believe it is. They just they make you think through things that to the point that you would have never have thought them through. So I think PRB. Oh yeah. It's very time consuming and difficult, but I think it's worthwhile. And the PRB, absolutely.
If we're running
Yeah, maybe.
to the end.
Yeah.
One last question?
Sure.
Okay. Maybe there'll be a couple of parts to it.
Okay.
I'm interested in your thoughts on what's the best thing that OSHA has done in the last 20 years, or its main accomplishment, and on the other side of that, what has been its main shortcoming, and what could be done about it? Tough question.
Yeah. Let me answer the last one, the shortcoming data. This agency does not have the data to properly target its enforcement activities, doesn't have the appropriate data to develop standards, doesn't have the appropriate data to analyze what sector of the economy or the industries need consultation or assistance data. And we're working towards that.
What could be done about it?
Well, we're going to do something about it. We're going to improve the data collection system. See, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has the data, but I don't get it because it's the BLS considers it's confidential. So we have to find another way of getting the data, not through the BLS system, because they will not release it.
Because they have information on specific firms?
Yeah. See, all of their programs are voluntary, with the exception of one, the OSHA program. OSHA is the only one mandated by law. All the others, the Consumer Price Index and all of that, it's voluntary from the companies. So their concern is, if they give me the OSHA data, that might hurt their other programs. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's their opinion, and I respect them.
So that's a real policy.
Yeah, it's a policy call. So we have to find out how to get the data, because this is mandated by law. It's not. You're not asking companies to please send it in. If they don't, you don't do anything. This is required, and so we could do a much better job. So we're working on that. We'll get a handle on that eventually, I hope. Probably a couple of. I think the PEL project was a major accomplishment, and I think has a communication from the standpoint of communicating knowledge to workers, knowledge that they can use to protect themselves. Now, that doesn't mean the standard is perfect, and we're going to be fine-tuning it, but those were two major things to get accomplished.
Those are two massive efforts. Right?
And they were two massive, yeah. And I think they will prove.
Tuesday, May 12th, 1992. My name is Judson McLaury, M-A-C capital L-A-U-R-Y. I'm the historian for the Department of Labor. I'm interviewing Mr. Gerard Scannell, S-C-A-N-N-E-L-L, former Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health from 1989 to 1991. Pardon me, make that 1989 to 1992.
First, I'd like to ask you, what was your, I know this is kind of coming out of the blue here, but what was your kind of philosophy of government as you were, when you were appointed to OSHA? What role, in general, did you see for government?
Well, Government in general, or
in
OSHA?
relation to the economy and the workforce?
Well, I always felt that, and I have to bring it, to the Labor Department, not to OSHA, but it would apply to any, by and large, regulatory agency, that, we were not there to cause American businesses to go out of business or American workers to lose their job. There had to be a balance of reasonableness, and yet, we always fell on the side of protecting the workers. It's ironic you asked that question, because I remember being at one meeting, the board of directors of the American Meat Institute, and OSHA had a number of enforcement actions against the red meat industry. It was ergonomic and trauma disorder issues. But one of the board of directors got up and said, "You're the enemy." And I felt so badly, and I convinced him that we weren't the enemy. He believed, at the end of the meeting, he says, "Well, I thought you were." It's a terrible thing for anybody to think their government is the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And that really impressed me, that there may be people out there that think we're the enemy. And I've got to convince them differently. I was a regulator, which is a tough job. But that the government should not be the enemy. The government's there to really provide the service, and even though you're a regulator, you can do it and still be not considered the enemy.
Narrowing it down to OSHA specifically, in your view, and you had long experience with OSHA before you were appointed to head the agency, what did you see as its principal mission?
Well, I'll be given the same answer whenever asked by others, and the same mission is to facilitate the protection of workers. I just used the part of the act right in the beginning. It says to assure workers as far as possible safe and healthy working conditions, and I kept to that. Oftentimes you can flow from that to a number of goals and objectives, and that's what I did in developing my goals and objectives. But it's really to effectuate better protection for workers.
Well, how did you see OSHA carrying that out? I mean, applying your philosophy of government. What did you see as the role there?
Well, I may have answered this before too on a previous interview. It was that we must enforce the law. We must do it in a reasonable manner, and that's by developing the standards and promulgating the standards, and then having what I call a strict enforcement of the regulations.
Without becoming the enemy.
Without becoming the enemy.
Right.
And you got to remember that I assessed a $11.4 million penalty with the company, and they gave me 10. And
What company
they
was
did
that?
say, they didn't say thank you very, very much, but they did say you were reasonable and fair. That was IMC, I think it was, IMF, the company.
That was the
Citgo
largest.
was the same. I made a point to talk to the chief executive officer in each one of those companies, and I think this is important for the future, because you have to remember that I had more penalties, higher penalties than any other administrator, and each time people thought the hue and cry would put OSHA on the backtrack again, and it wasn't. Because I made a point of going to the CEO of the company and tell them two things I don't like about my job. One is I don't like to penalize American business because I still think this is the greatest country in the world, and we get the best system. It isn't perfect, but I still think it's the best system, free enterprise system. Don't like to penalize companies, large million-dollar penalties, because that tells me the management system in that company has failed.
This is what you're telling the CEO.
This is what I
when you
tell the
call
CEO,
him.
and I'll tell him where his company failed. And then I say the second thing I don't like about my job is to see workers killed and injured. And as long as workers are killed and injured, I'm afraid I'll have to penalize companies large sums of money because the system failed. They'd say, well, what do you mean the system failed? I told them in every case that someone in his organization at a relatively high position in management knew what caused the accident before it occurred. But it was not considered important. It was put aside. We found that out in our investigation. So I say, Mr. CEO, your management failed you, your management failed your workers, your management failed the shareholders, and it could have been prevented. This is not nitpicking. And, one of the main points is I wanted them to know OSHA does not nitpick. These are major egregious violations, willful egregious violations. Because in the past, I've seen lower level managers let the CEO know that. That's OSHA nitpicking. And they'll believe generally what they're told. Well, I guess it is. They told me the truth. I got there and I told them we didn't nitpick. This could have been prevented, and it wasn't. And when you're a CEO, you're at the pinnacle of your career. You wanna make money. You wanna leave a legacy. You wanna be considered a great CEO of that company. The last thing you want is someone to come to you and say, "Hey, boss, 23 workers died last night in an explosion." You don't want to be the CEO when that happens. So I kind of co-opted and got into the system and proved that OSHA was not nitpicking, and that we could have proposed much higher penalties, but we did what we thought was fair. That was important.
So you called CEOs when it was a major.
Yep. I would
major
go to the major disaster. Every major disaster I went to.
Right, I remember.
And generally, when they heard I was going, they would come.
Mm-hmm.
One CEO I heard, it was Arco.
Mm-hmm.
President or CEO, it's halfway across the Atlantic. He heard about the explosion. They told him that I was on the way there. He turned the plane around and went back. It's important enough for me to go.
Mm-hmm.
That's important enough for him to be
Mm-hmm.
there. That was their thought on that. But that's, and I think it was important for them to be there.
Mm-hmm. What impact do you think that had on the business attitude toward OSHA? Your philosophy of going to the CEOs and being kind of up front.
Well, I not only during the explosions, but throughout the 27 months that I was there,
Mm-hmm.
I worked overtime to communicate with the CEOs of business. I worked overtime to communicate with the CEOs of the unions,
Mm-hmm.
because they have CEOs, the
Mhm.
Bob Georgines and the others,
Mm-hmm.
and the Jake West of the ironworkers. When I didn't agree with the ironworkers, Jake West said, "You know what you're talking about?" I said, "Well, show me." He said, "What do you mean?" I says, "Show me how I can walk iron. Take me up on the 37th floor of the Chicago Library. I want to see." He couldn't believe that. We did it.
You did it?
He did it in February. It's cold in Chicago on the
And windy.
37th floor. But he was amazed that
Mhm.
someone like at that level would do that. I said,
Mhm.
"It's the only way I'm going to find out whether I'm making the right decision or not." So and that's what I found worked. You've got to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
When you disagree with them and you make a decision, it's opposite from what either side wants. You go to them and tell them, "Look, this is my decision because this, this, and this. I know you disagree with it, but I made it because of this, and this, and this." They, without an exception, and I think my record will show that, no one ever really, except one union leader, no one ever really blasted OSHA. on me. They said they gave us a fair shake. They listened to us. Scannell came out and looked at the place. He spent time, and then he made his decision. That's all we can ask.
Not to dwell on the negative, but what was that incident with the union?
It was Bob Wages from OCAR, and it was he
Oil,
disagreed-
Chemical, and
Oil,
Atomic
Chemical, and
Workers
Atomic
Union.
Workers, yeah. And he just disagreed with what the secretary's decision, my decision was, and he called her a political hack, which was absolutely the most unfair thing you could say. I mean, it was wrong. So I kind of discredit his statement.
What was that issue over? Do you remember?
It was settlement.
Specifically?
Settlement of one of these major petrochemical fires.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he wanted, he said we didn't involve the unions. We did. We involved all the unions right down in Texas where the fires were.
Okay.
And he claims he wasn't involved. I faxed him. He wasn't in the office. I faxed him the settlement agreement before we signed to let him see it and comment. 3 days they had it, and they never commented. I called him up on Thursday, and I said, Wednesday night, I said, I'm going to sign the agreement. Any comments? And he wasn't there. But his deputy said, well, we don't have any comments. And then they blasted me. So I kind of discredit those kind of comments.
No defense against that kind of thing, I guess.
Not really. I don't think so.
I'm going to deviate from my schedule here a little bit. We're kind of talking about your role as Assistant Secretary. Maybe we could develop that a little further. Did you see your role as kind of dealing as more of an outside man than an inside man, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean, because I organized it that way.
Yeah.
I organized with the fact that I'm really the one that has to communicate with the outside community. You have a great staff to work with, and one reason that I hired Alan McMillan as the deputy, I said he's the inside guy. The day-to-day activities. A very successful career person who did an outstanding job. Also had Cindy Douglas to deal with the outside agencies, the other federal agencies. But I mean, I knew every decision. I made every decision that went on in the company, in the agency, of the important ones that had to be made by me. Alan never missed an opportunity to check with me whenever he was going to do something. I'd say, go ahead and do it, whatever. So, for me, it worked out very well. And I think history will determine just how well it was run during those times. But
Future historian.
Yeah, I think it went okay.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could spell that out a little bit as an outside, as Mr. Outside for OSHA. What were your? We talked a little bit about your role with dealing with major penalties and so on. In what other ways did you reach out and relate with the business and labor communities?
Well, probably more important than the penalties, I reached out to the business community to take on voluntary compliance, take it on seriously. Trenching standard, excavation standard. I went to the American Association of General Contractors and asked them if they wouldn't put on a special program. We'd provide some speakers for it around the country. Later on, I heard Bert Meady, who was the, I guess, executive director at AGC. They did an outstanding job. He said, no one's ever asked us before. I thought, God, that's kind of strange. No one's ever asked us before. And that's all it took. We got together more associations, more organizations in the business community, got them together to promote voluntary compliance. Because I've said, if it requires OSHA to be in every plant once a year in this country, and there's over 7 million, the country's going down the tubes. There's something wrong with the system. employers are responsible. They've got to understand, and then you just hold them accountable. But it's communicating that this is what we need in this country. We don't need more, thousands of more compliance officers in OSHA. That's not the way to make it work. So reaching out, promoting voluntary compliance.
Yeah.
Reached out to the unions and to academia.
What about the unions? What particular?
Well, the building
Contracts.
trades, I would go over and talk to Bob Georgine, primarily building trades being the construction group,
Right.
and one of the highest hazards, that they have to participate. I mean, it is a participative sport, if you will. Both sides, and not only both sides, business, but academia, the government. It's a partnership, is what I called it from the beginning. And I never had any, not even OCAR. That was OCAR works all the many chemical and petrochemical companies and plants. Everyone is serious about worker safety and health. But you have to go out and galvanize them, unfortunately. And so often OSHA has been backpedaling. Once you start getting criticized and you have to start backpedaling, you find yourself on the bicycle backpedaling forever. I didn't want that to happen. I wanted to take a proactive role and get out there and promote it.
Was that when you came in? Was that kind of a goal in the back of your mind that you wanted to get OSHA into a proactive role?
Proactive role.
From the start.
One of the first things is had a meeting of all the managers of OSHA. Hadn't been done in a long time. I addressed them, told them what my goals were. But what I said is, I want you to tell me what needs to be done. You're out there working and have been working in the business community and in the unions, discussing and inspecting. What do you see we need to do to make us more effective? And they came forward with lots of suggestions. We put through task forces. We acted upon every recommendation, and we told them what action we took, whether it was, no, we don't think this is going to work, and why it won't work. Yes, this. You have to be proactive in this business. I mean, I'm proactive here now. You got to be out selling it all the time, but safety pays, and that's one thing oftentimes people have ignored. All you ever hear about is the cost, the cost of safety. Well, I tell you, I can prove safety pays, and that's the message you have to get out there.
Did you see a need? Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but was there some need to kind of sell OSHA within the government? There are various agencies within the federal government, as you know, that have some say on what OSHA does. There's Office of Management, Budget, Council on Competitiveness, committee, the labor committees in the House and Senate, and then there are other agencies that are kind of working in parallel with you or overlapping, such as the EPA, Department of Transportation, and so on. I'll just ask a general question. Did you see a need to try to sell OSHA within that universe also?
Yeah.
And how did that work?
Yeah, probably. Oftentimes, and we've heard recently where OMB may be obstructionists. I never found that to be the case with OMB. Does OMB ask tough questions? Yeah, they ask tough questions. Very tough. So you better know your business when you go over there to discuss these rules and regulations, which they have the right to review and to ask questions.
No, oftentimes you could anticipate even the kinds of questions they were going to ask.
Sure.
Right. So did that, well, that must have conditioned particularly the rulemaking to quite an extent.
Well, it didn't condition rulemaking. It made you do your homework to better provide the answer to the question, so that their question is kind of, oh, you answered my question. We didn't change the rule.
I see.
In anticipation of their questions. you know, we knew they were going to ask some tough questions, and we, you know, I think we prevailed on everything that I ever got involved in over there.
Mhm.
We may have had to come back and, you know, studied it again and come back and said, hey,
Right.
this position is still the right position to take, and this is the level that we should be taking. Yeah. OMB, Competitiveness Council, never ran into the Competitiveness Council in a formal way.
Mhm.
There have been some people sitting at the OMB meeting from the Competitiveness Council, but more observers. I mean, I'm sure one or two of them may have asked a question, but they were legitimate questions, whatever they were. But I was never lobbied by, I don't know whether lobby's the right word, but I've never been, no one ever tried to leverage me from the Competitiveness Council. Never really talked to anybody in any official capacity from the Competitiveness Council.
So there was not formal contact, direct contact between an agency like OSHA and the council?
No, I never had any formal. In other words, come on
Staff
over to a
contact,
meeting.
or-
No, the only, there would be maybe only in 2 meetings at OMB were there ever people from the Competitiveness Council. And generally speaking, they're at a staff level, working level, technician kind of a person, I guess. I think Al Hubbard was the deputy director or something.
Yes.
Who's
Kind of executive
was
director.
left. He sat in a meeting next to me, the only time I met him, and just made a passing comment, never ventured a position on whatever we were talking about. I forget what it was. I forget what it was. I mean, I forget the subject of the OMB. But I always felt that the public was best served by asking tough questions, so that regulators can't do anything they'd like to do or want to do. I mean, you know, regulators have a mission, agency has a mission, and you know, if there isn't someone asking tough questions, we might do something that would be wrong.
Right.
It's not going to,
And-
you know, a greater burden than necessary or whatever. So I never considered it an intrusion of my authority.
And we've talked about, at our previous meeting, we talked about the Policy Review Board. Unless you have anything to add on that.
No,
Yeah.
but the rest of the question that you asked on EPA and DOT and others, EPA, we found the lines blurred between EPA and OSHA many times because of legislative, what happened up at, you know, in bills. The legislature would include something that was really workplace. And I think good government really demands that if this is done, that your government must kind of sharpen up those blurred lines so that the regulated community knows what to do. And that is probably one of the most legitimate roles OMB has. That we have 2 agencies that may have trouble sometimes unblurring those lines. They got to make sure that they do, so you don't have duplicative rules, and the regulated community understands and knows what rules to follow, and that there aren't overlaps and redundancy and conflicts, would be the worst. And so I think I must have had the best relationship with EPA than any former administrator in recent years. At least that's what I was told. We really worked very well with Riley and Hank Havoc and the rest.
Did you meet frequently
Oh,
with
yeah,
Riley?
too often. I'd have breakfast with one assistant administrator, say for enforcement. I'd have lunch with another one, and I'd be out having dinner with a third one. I mean, it required a great deal of contact, and that was the reason I had Cindy Douglas. That was her job to deal with outside agencies like that.
I had no idea. That's very interesting. I had no idea that there was that intense relationship.
There's
with the
something like, I don't want to exaggerate, but there's probably close to 6 or 8 committees that OMB and OSHA are on.
Hmm.
And they're just OMB, OSHA
Yeah.
committees.
Oh, OMB or EPA?
I'm sorry, thank you, EPA.
EPA.
That they meet on a daily basis, almost weekly. It is amazing. And EPA could drive OSHA's agenda. I mean, that's probably an exaggeration, but under TSCA, EPA refers chemicals.
The Toxic
to-
Substances Control Act.
And OSHA has to make decisions on these. I mean, they could keep referring things to us on a daily basis.
It could almost get out of hand, couldn't it?
Yes, and drive our total
Yeah,
agenda,
yeah.
unless we work together. And
Yeah.
I'd meet with Linda
Yeah.
Fisher, and we'd talk about it, and say, you know, this would not be good for the good government to do this.
Mhm.
You know. So, and, yeah, that's right. EPA is, I even recommended, informally recommended, the Secretary suggested that I not, that OSHA move over to EPA and have one super health, safety, environmental agency.
Hmm.
Most corporations are doing that. They're
Mhm.
housing those 3 in one.
Hmm.
I said, we ought to think about that. Someone ought to really think about that.
How far did that get?
Didn't go very far. We get too parochial.
Secretaries
Just
don't like to.
Just like I suggested, give me 6 months before you can me, Madam Secretary. And Bill
Tattersall?
Tattersall,
Yeah.
Bill would be upset with me if I forgot his name. Bill Tattersall and I will put together a plan to merge OSHA and EPSHA. I don't think Bill really wanted to do that, and probably a lot, but good government.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense, just superficially anyway.
Yeah.
But a lot of complicated issues there, I'm sure. Well,
Very complicated, but anyhow, there is so, in DOT, FAA, Federal Railroad Administration, I wanted to rewrite, or at least revisit, every memorandum of understanding, and there were, it was like 26 in total. That were 20 years old, 18 years old, 15 years old. I said, we've got to relook at those, and we started to. And
before we get, I hate
ahead.
to interrupt, but before we get totally off the EPA.
Oh, okay.
I remember at a policy review board meeting, you mentioned that Administrator Riley had announced in publicly that workplace exposure to hazards was the second largest health threat in the country. Were you surprised at that statement, or is it something that you were aware of when it came out?
you know, I
or-
think I'm going back a number of years, but I use it in speeches today.
Mhm.
In fact, I used it in a speech where I was speaking for Bill Riley.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the
Mhm.
relationship that I developed out there.
Mhm.
He couldn't make a luncheon speech in Philadelphia. I understand, try to get Andy Cobb, the new Secretary of Transportation, because it was on hazardous material spills, transportation, very important.
Mhm.
And he couldn't, so they asked me. So I went down and made it 2 weeks ago. Point is that,
What are you saying, that this was not a new point when he made it back in
yeah,
December?
No, I mean, someone probably should ask, well, where'd you get, what are you talking from? Where's the data source? Well, I would use the data source that I use, and that is Marcus Key, the first director of NIOSH, said 100,000 workers die every year from exposure to a toxic substance in the workplace. Dr. Sidney Wolf of Ralph Nader's Public Citizen,
Mhm.
Health Research Group, I guess, Public Citizen,
Mhm.
said, no, 300,000. take your pick, split it. I mean, I'll go with the conservative, I guess.
Right.
NIOSH, 100,000.
Yeah.
You know how many deaths that BLS counts every year? About 3,400 last year. NIOSH says it's about 7,000. National Safety Council says it's 10, 11, 13,000. We're talking 100,000 or more as from an occupational exposure to a toxic substance. So I don't know where Bill got that from, but it's probably, comes from about the same source. It's a major, major concern. I don't know how we prove it.
Right. I just wondered what impact you felt that statement had at that time. Certainly that's coming from a high level
Yeah.
person. It was obviously, I think, intended to have an impact.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, again, the blurred lines of EPA is looking at workplace stuff, and workplace is OSHA. But the one thing that the government can't do, it would be folly for OSHA to ignore a data source as valuable as EPA, and vice versa. We're dealing with asbestos. We worked hand in glove with the latest asbestos rulings with EPA, because you're talking about public buildings. Well, you got workers in public buildings, so it's very important.
I remember in our first interview, I asked you one of the biggest problems with OSHA or the biggest lacks, and you said data.
That's right. Yeah. And it still is.
I'd like to move on now to some specific, fairly specific issues. The solicitor's office in the department was always very concerned, and rightly so, about making sure that OSHA proposed regulations were defensible, legally defensible. Did you feel that they were generally kind of hitting it in an about right, or too conservative, or too liberal with it, or did you have any general statements you can make on that?
My experience with the solicitor's office was generally they were right on.
You didn't feel that they were being too constrictive?
No, I mean, occasionally an individual in the solicitor's office might have a position that was probably not appropriate, and we would resolve that. And I wouldn't expect everyone to agree with me all the time.
Sure.
Because I'm not always right. And but through this, it was kind of a collaborative process, John. I mean, that's what I believed in, a collaborative process. I don't think there is anyone that knows everything that can be kind of dictated down there. And so it was important that the solicitors give me the benefit of their position and others, and vice versa. And we usually, I did not quarrel with the process at all. That was a good process, and the solicitor's office played a great role. And we, Bob Davis was just a, unbelievably great guy to work with.
The solicitor, the solicitor of labor.
Yeah,
Bob Davis.
Bob Davis. And then when Bob left, David Fortney played the same role,
Right.
outstanding, the acting solicitor. And then Marshall Brigg, although it was just a short period of time,
Right.
he brought his own style in there, but you can't be thin-skinned when you get to those levels and in those positions.
You don't last too long if you are.
No,
I've
you
seen.
wouldn't last long. I mean, too thin-skinned from the standpoint of sometimes, I mean, you wouldn't want to say, I don't want to hear those kind of questions. You have to. In order to, I think, for public policy to really work and come up where it should, you got to hear all sides and get all opinions and so forth, and then you can make I think a more intelligent decision.
And you're still going to get kicked around a little, but at least you talk to everybody.
That's right. That's right. And you can answer. You can
Yeah.
usually answer why. Because the question is, well, why didn't you consider this point? Ah, we did. That was raised, and this is why we didn't.
So getting back to your role again, your kind of philosophy as OSHA administrator, would you say, I don't want to put words in your mouth,
Right.
you can just react, but that you would administer more by consensus than by confrontation?
No, not consensus. But I use the collaborative process.
Collaborative, okay.
Okay, which doesn't mean consensus. No, as a matter of fact, well, there were always, I guess there were times where you could say there was some consensus in the decision, but I never relied on consensus.
In other words, collaborative,
Collaborative.
how do you define that?
Collaborative is by seeking out and discussing all the issues and then making up
Yeah.
the right decision, or the decision,
Right,
or my opinion, whatever it was.
right. I'm jumping around a bit here.
It's
There's
okay.
so much to cover, but in rulemaking and in presenting proposed rules to the public, I know that the administration, the Department of Labor administration, was always concerned with the kind of the public relations aspect of the rule. How was this proposal going to hit the affected
Yeah.
communities? I can remember meetings, again with the Policy Review Board, where Jenna Dorn and I think Nancy Risk-Rohrbach, also the Assistant Secretaries for Policy, would say, well, this rule it really isn't so bad for business, but it looks bad. And can you present your data in such a way that it reflects that? So I'd just like to ask in a general way, how did you deal with kind of the public relations aspects of promulgating and rulemaking?
Well, I dealt with it from, again, a proactive stand by getting out to the business community or labor, whatever, and telling them what it was,
Right.
rather than throwing it up and letting someone just shoot at it. This is a probably a criticism of the process, although the process was a good process. Oftentimes, people in some various positions, whether it be in policy or in solicitor's office or whatever, did not understand the workplace and what we were trying to do. And we're trying to evaluate what the rules, I guess, as you had said, well, it really isn't that bad, but what's the perception and so forth? It doesn't look like it's going to be good. Sometimes they don't know what the workplace they don't know what the workplace is. They don't know really what effect it's having on the workplace. And they don't know how closely the workplace, the business community, and the employees worked with us to develop the rule.
I think often the times the Policy Review Board meetings were an educative process, and I know that Nancy and Jenna and Mike Baruti before your time, always tried to open it up and allow the agencies to educate them. Tell us.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us what it's like out there.
Right.
We want to know. We want to understand.
Yeah. But then there were also some people who had their own source of information, who I would characterize as being extremely biased and political. Biased, not political. Biased and parochial. and try to influence the process, because they had a narrow piece of information coming from a particular source. And that used to irritate me, but that's always a risk, I guess, in every organization.
Without asking you to name names, but what particular issues did that come out in?
Yeah, it didn't happen very often. I think one issue was indoor air quality. Indoor air quality. It sorted out fine. The position I was looking for prevailed, but it was it's tough to shoot a. I mean, be open, candid with me, and put it on the table, and then let me give you the information I have. And my information, in that would kind of blow that off the table. But the person wouldn't believe it. It kept, it was tenacious, but it was a very narrow piece of information they had.
Okay.
But that's, you get
Yeah.
that from any organization.
Sure. I'm not
Could have it.
surprised that you mentioned the indoor air, though, because I remember as the minute taker of the Policy Review Board meetings that there was a closed PRB meeting on indoor air.
That's right.
That there were no minutes. It was the only meeting that I had never attended. There were no minutes. Simply a decision was issued that a request for information would come out.
Yeah.
But I take it that was the result. You got the result that you were
Yeah.
hoping for from that.
Yeah, there was.
So
Yeah,
it was-
there was.
Result. I'd love to have been there, but
Yeah.
can you? Well, I don't know. Do you want to say any more about that
No.
meeting? Or okay. I know when not
Well,
to press.
those were fun. I mean, I always enjoyed that. It's as long as the result.
Yeah, right.
As
long as you
it was
win.
an agreement. I'm in agreement with the result.
Mm.
Yeah.
Fond memories of the department.
Fun memories. There weren't many of those meetings, though. There weren't many, that's for sure.
I know. Well, here's a big question. I don't know how much. Well, we've got a little time to get into it. The whole question of the impact of regulation on business and on the economy, and how do you balance the need? Kind of what was your? I know it was difficult. How did you balance the need for safety and health, the need to preserve the economy, and in particular, one of the most crucial aspects of the economy of the business community is the small business community. I remember at Policy Review Board meetings, various people would always be asking, but what about small business? Did you consider the impact on small business? How are they going to handle this?
Yeah.
So maybe we could focus on the small business side for a bit.
And those were good questions, and they deserved they deserved an answer. And sometimes, on occasions, we had not given it the thought that we should have given it, I think, in the balancing the cost benefit of it. And so those are good questions where we didn't, and where participants in the PRB could identify those positions.
That was one of the
That was
purposes of the
That's right.
PRB.
That's right.
Bring up those things.
You hope to have all the answers, and occasionally we didn't. We dealt with some complex issues. Small business community, I think I was sensitive, extremely sensitive to the small business community. And one reason I reached out and tried to be proactive with the National Federation of Independent Prisons, the Chamber of Commerce, and others, it was because of the small business community. And it's difficult to see companies going out of business because of regulations. I never saw that. As a matter of fact, I've been asked questions time and time again. What about small businesses or business going out of business because they can't live with the OSHA regulations? I said, show me one. I'd like to see one. I'd like to work with them. Some of the standards are not that complex. However, I guess there are some businesses in this country, small, that are running unsafe operations, and maybe they should be out of business. You know, I hate to say it, I'd like to see them, but you know, I visit Hamlet, North Carolina, and I see companies such as the company that ran that business, and the way they ran it, I'm not so sure. You know, the problem that I'm faced is people's jobs, but at some point in time, maybe it's better that people do not work than risk losing their hands, their arms, and their lives. I mean, where it's imminent danger. It's a tough call, but I'd like the opportunity to go see those companies and try to help them get into compliance first, if they really want to.
But it makes it very risky if the company can kind of document that they were put out of business, and then it becomes a big,
Sure.
blown up case.
But you know, I'd like to go see that company. Some companies, they never put money back into the business. They're underfunded to begin with, and so forth. And people say, "Well, who are you to make decisions?" Well, that's it. I'm not making those decisions anymore. But at one point in time, I did, and like I started out not in business to put companies out of business or American workers out of jobs, but on the other hand, we can't risk killing 25 people.
You visited the Hamlet, North Carolina site. Maybe you could just give some impressions of what you saw.
Well, you know, I saw where allegedly the mechanic who was working on the hydraulic line got blown from about 10 feet across the room, and where he hit with such a force against the tiles, the white tiles in that room, that when I got there, there was like an outline of his body where it hit the tiles that fallen down. And the tiles were all white tiles, except I didn't know that. They were covered with like, not a quarter of an inch, but probably 3/16 and 8/16 inch of soot, just incomplete combustion. I saw where Bobby Quick, when he was a young man that took 3 runs at a door, and you could see where he went airborne and his feet were horizontal because the footprints were against the door. There were 3 sets of his footprints. The first 2 jumps at the door didn't open, and he fell to the concrete ground. He didn't think he could get up again, and he somehow did that 3rd time and broke the padlock, so the door opened. Because of Bobby Quick's action, about 25 workers got out that would have died in there. Talked to a woman who was there, worked in this poultry processing plant the week before the fire, who had asked her supervisor. I asked her a question. Why didn't you report? The doors were locked closed. She said, I'm not sure I would have known. The doors were bolted from the outside. She says, but let me tell you, I asked my supervisor a week before if I could take my mom to the hospital. She had no way of getting to the hospital, and that I'd be late about 15 minutes. Supervisor said, you're fired. Don't bother coming in anymore. I mean, it was, I heard story after story about the way people were treated, and it was just awful. And then to think that they were locking the doors or blocking the doors and so forth. So, you know, those are experiences that you live through. The petrochemical fires, talking to people in a burn center whose 90% burned
Mm.
in the body, and you know from talking to them that they're not going to live, and they didn't.
Did that change your attitude or in any way? What effect did that have on you as an administrator?
Well, you know, I've been in this business all my life,
Yeah.
just about, and so
Yeah.
I've experienced things like that. But it just, you know, just kind of makes you believe that what you're doing is right and that you want to try to prevent these things from happening again.
Mm-hmm.
Not to become you know, a zealot to save the world, you know, but you want to do your job the best you can and not forget that there are people out there who are, God, it would be awful if there are 100,000 people who are dying every year from an exposure to a toxic substance. I mean, we get, you know, we lose focus sometimes, and the publicity of the hamlets, you know, cause congressional hearings and lots of other things. We focus on those, and those do take the focus off the problem that exists in the workplace. If there are 100,000 dying from exposure to toxic substance, we got to get at that. We kind of got off the question.
Oh, that's all right. It's perfectly all right. After serving for over 2 years as OSHA administrator and having many years of experience there working for other administrators, I wonder if you could, if you have a brief list of the main qualifications for to be a head of OSHA. What kind of person, what kind of experience has been most useful, and is there any experience that you wish, say, that you had had in your own background when you came in, also that would have benefited you? This is kind of for the future, for posterity.
Yeah. I felt that I had ideal experience. I probably would like to have had more hands-on experience in the cost benefit.
Uh-huh. The economics.
Economics.
Uh-huh.
I've had some, but not. I would like to have had more, so I could fully understand.
That's a tricky area.
Very tricky area, extremely tricky. But the point is that.
But important rulemaking.
Yeah, it's very important. We consider the cost benefits and safety standards, and you don't, you know, it's health standards. You've got some restrictions under the Supreme Court decision, benzene. But you know, people say, well, when it comes to safety, you shouldn't consider the cost. That's idealistic. You can't help but consider it. You must. I mean, when any of us in our own private lives go to buy an automobile, I mean, we might all buy the most expensive automobile if we didn't care. I mean, you know, cost had nothing to do with it. We don't. Right. We buy something that'll meet our needs, something that we like. So cost is a very important part of it. But one reason that I mentioned that, not only the cost, but the benefit. I directed Roy Clausen, who was in the policy shop, to go back, because no one has ever done any retrospective studies on standards promulgated 20 years ago, when I was director of standards. And I know there was the vinyl chloride standard, I am told, created a new industry, a thriving industry. And the costs that were put on some of those standards, what did they really cost? Yeah. And in some cases, they probably cost more. In other cases, they cost less. And so I think it's very important, the cost benefit, because oftentimes people just talk about the cost.
Had this not been done at OSHA?
Had never been
before?
done. Had never been done. I was surprised.
Yeah.
And so we started, I mean, it wasn't in the budget. I said, Roy, we got to do some studies, pick a standard. Ethylene oxide, I think, is one that they picked. And I think there is I think the study is almost complete or completed. I haven't seen it. But I think we need to do that. Now, that was one thing O&B agreed with me on. I said, absolutely. I think that's important, extremely important. Because maybe we're doing cost-benefit studies. Maybe we're doing them right, maybe we're doing them wrong. Anyhow, that's why I wish I had more knowledge in the economics of the effect of regulations on the public. But other than that, I felt technically I had no problem with the job because it's been my business, in managing it, I had no problem with the job because I've been managing people for years and years.
You had a government and a private
Government
industry
and a private,
background.
yep.
And what, military?
In military.
In military.
And so I knew the strengths of the agency. I think I knew some of the weaknesses, and the way I organized it, I think accommodated that. Did I do a good job? As I said, who knows? Someone will probably. Future historians may make a decision on that.
Historians.
But
maybe you could give your own kind of well, not a self-evaluation, just kind of a reaction, your main frustrations and satisfactions on the job at OSHA.
Well, my satisfaction is when I had set the goals and stayed with them, we accomplished, I think, a great deal. Frustrations are the frustrations that people probably have in all those kinds of jobs down there. And that is, you never accomplished all the things you would like to have accomplished. And the list is never ending. It keeps going on and on. Who would have ever thought that OSHA would be dealing with bloodborne pathogens and indoor air quality and some of the very complicated issues, process safety management of highly hazardous chemicals, 20 years ago. I mean, when I was the director of standards, I would never figure it'd be bloodborne pathogens. It keeps getting more complicated. Life gets more complicated down there. But those were successes. Process safety management, coming up with that. Bloodborne pathogens. Those were great successes. And the agency deserves the credit. The people, the career people, not the political people. I allowed them to accomplish what was accomplished. I always felt that I worked for the career people in the agency, and I allowed them to really accomplish things. They did it through me, but they were the ones that did it, and it's true. And that's not patronizing them at all.
I'll see that they see this transcript.
Absolutely. I mean, they deserved it. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.